Hello, this is Mark O'Brien, and I'd like to present an introduction to search and graphs in Scalyr. I'm going to show you around the UI, point out some of the key features and how to build queries. I'm also going to show you how easy it is to move back and forth between the search interface and the graphs page to get you to the answers you're looking for quickly. To get started, I want to talk about our architecture and what differentiates us. And this will help you formulate queries that are most optimized for our system. In speaking about our architecture, there are two main points that are particularly relevant to this conversation. The first is around how we store data, and the second is around how we use a massively parallel computing cluster to return results quickly. One way we differentiate is by virtue of the way that we store data. Most of our competitors use a keyword index-based solution. What this does is, as the data is coming in, they build and maintain a keyword index, which can then be used at the time of searching to reference where certain words or tokens appear in the dataset. This works great for web search. It works great when you need to show the top 10 matches and when you're working on a human language corpus or large documents. This is great for data that doesn't change really fast, but none of these things really match the log management use case. Instead, what we need to be able to do is work with both real-time data as it comes in, as well as looking back on historical data. We need real-time ingestion so that data is accessible to us as fast as possible for alerting and also tailing and troubleshooting. We want to make sure this performs well at scale. And of course, we're working with machine-generated data, so it's not just English words, for example. It's all kinds of combinations of letters and numbers and characters. This is data with very high cardinality. None of these things are really well suited for a keyword index. So instead, we built our own columnar database specifically for this purpose. The idea is that as we ingest data, we parse it into columns or discrete fields. These fields get stored together on disk. What we're looking at here in this example is Webster log lines. And I've got all my IP addresses, dates, actions, etc. So if I want to search specifically on IP address, I'm only going to search this particular data. I don't have to scroll through my entire data set to find an answer. So this is one part of our solution, and this is combined with a massively parallel search architecture. Scalyr is delivered as a hosted service. We leverage the economies of our scale as a vendor to be able to provide you an incredible amount of compute power when it comes time for you to do a search. Your data is sharded amongst multiple servers, and all those servers participate in returning search results. We are able to provide you a huge amount of computing power at a very cost-effective rate because these servers are shared amongst all of our customers. So again, there are two main things I wanted you to take away from these slides on architecture. The first is the way in which we store data in a columnar database, and the second, we use a massively parallel computing cluster to return results. And I hope what you'll take away is that we are well positioned to deliver search results quickly, but one practical thing that come out of this is that searching against a specific field is more performant than searching against free text because there's less data for us to search against. I'd also like to make a few notes around how we get data into Scalyr. So the majority of our customers are using some form of our Scalyr agent to bring in data. We have a Linux and a Windows version. These are just Python scripts that are very simple to install. You configure it to point to specific files, which we essentially tail and stream those logs to our system as the data is written to disk. We also have a Docker container, as well as a Kubernetes daemon set, which makes it very easy to deploy our agent in a Kubernetes environment. There are a number of different integrations that we have. So there's also a FluentD connector. We can ingest data from Logstash. We can also accept data in syslog format. And we have a number of integrations with AWS, including a CloudWatch Logs integration. And we have a couple of solutions for working with Google Cloud Platform and Azure as well. And lastly, we also have an API. So you can write data directly to us via the API. So this gives you a sense of a number of different ways that we are getting data into Scalyr. And with that, let's dive into the product. When you first log into Scalyr, you're taken to this log overview page, which shows you an overview of your log volume at the top. So in my case, I can see that I've got logs coming in, and the log volume is steadily increasing over the last several hours. In this next section here, I'm seeing my actual log data sources. Here I've got a Kubernetes cluster with a number of deployments underneath it. And if I scroll down, I get to my other sources section, which is my more traditional virtual machines or servers. Basically, I've got a server host name here and any number of log files underneath that server. In this demo account, I've got some app servers, I've got some image servers, and some web servers. I can click on a server host name and that will take me to search. Another way to get to the search page is just to go to the search menu and select new search. But because I came from the log overview page, this comes in with my server host pre-populated. So that points me to this field right here, this search box, which contains the server selection. If I just type a few characters, you can see I've got several web servers here. But if I just type those characters and I hit enter, I am now searching for all of my server hosts that contain web. And I'm seeing log lines from all different servers that contain those characters. So again, the first box here allows me to narrow down by server host. And the second box here allows me to narrow down by log file. So if I want to look at just the specific log file on these web servers, I can do that. Quick note, if you're using Kubernetes, these fields do double duty. So if I click here on the cluster name, you'll notice it populates up here. So this field not only allows you to select server host, it also allows you to narrow down by Kubernetes cluster. And in this case, then the second field allows you to narrow down by deployment. So again, these fields do double duty. The first one is either server host or Kubernetes cluster, and the second is either log file or deployment. And clicking on the X's will clear out these boxes. So I'm going to go back to my example of searching for my web servers, and I'm going to just look at the Nginx access log. Beneath this here, you'll see a set of facets. As I mentioned earlier, as we ingest data, we parse the data into separate columns. We have a number of built-in parsers that can do this, or you can also configure a custom parser. So what we're seeing here along the left are the different fields that we found extracted from these specific log lines. If I click on a facet, I can see the different values that are available, as well as a graph that shows me their relative frequency. So what I can see here is that I'm getting a number of 200 status codes, but I'm getting a few status codes that are non-200s. If I click on a value, I'm going to narrow down to just look, for example, at the 404s from this data set. And you can see here that it's added to the query at the top of the page. I can continue to narrow down. So for example, I could click on IP, look at some different IP addresses. I could narrow down to a specific IP address. And again, this is getting appended to the query at the top. I can undo, I can just step backwards by using the back button in my browser. So I can just go back to the previous step, or I also have the option of being able to click the X here as well. If I click on a single log line, I get a couple more options that appear. So I can go ahead and inspect the fields, and I can see details about this particular log line. What I'm seeing at the top here is this is the raw log line that was ingested. And beneath it, I can see the log fields that were parsed. So again, as we ingested the log, we broke this up into a set of fields, things like timestamp, agent, the number of bytes, the response time, etc. Beneath this, I have a set of server fields. So these are fields that in this case were attached by the agent that are more global. So these apply to all of the logs that come in on a given stream. And they tell me things like, what is the server host name? What is the server IP, the session, the log file, etc. So again, these are more global. These apply to all of the log lines that come in from the stream, as opposed to these log fields, which are unique to this specific log line. I also have the ability here, if I'd like, to continue to narrow down. So if I want to look at logs that just have this particular IP address, I can narrow down, and this is my result. One thing I'd like to point out here is you'll notice that the query is built here with a $sign, prepending all of the field names. This is one way in which log fields versus server fields are differentiated. If you want to search on a server field, you must use the $sign. So for example, if I want to search for logs from a specific parser, it's very important that I use this $sign. For regular log fields, it's optional. So I can go ahead and delete the $sign from those two fields because those are log fields, not server fields, and I'll get the same result. However, we just recommend using the $sign across the board so that you don't have to remember which is which. So I'm going to clear this out and do another search and click on a log line here. One more thing that you'll notice is that if you click and drag across part of your text, some additional options become available to you. You can add another filter to the criteria so that we can narrow down to just log lines in this data set that contain this text, or I could exclude this text from my search, or alternately I could do an entirely new search for this string. And when I do this, you'll notice it clears out all of my other settings, and I'm looking now at this string appearing across a variety of log lines and a variety of servers and log files. I can also, if I want to start over, I can just go back to New Search. I'm going to continue with my example of searching web Nginx access logs. And I want to show you how easy it is to move back and forth between search and graph. So if I click this Expand Graph button, you'll see that I'm taken to a new view. What I'm looking at here by default is a graph of the number of matching events per second. So you can see here that the number of events per second is steadily growing over time. It's also very easy for me to move back and see the logs that are underlying each of these graphs. And if I look at my facets here, I have some options to move into a graph as well. So in this case, there are 8 different server hosts that are represented by this data set, and I can graph the number of matches by server host. This is essentially what we call a breakdown graph. So we're showing the number of matching events per second broken down by server hosts. And I'll show you a trick here. We may want to switch from a line chart to a stacked bar chart to become a little more readable here. And so now I can see kind of the relative distribution of these servers within 15-minute periods. Or if I'd like, I can make these bars larger or smaller accordingly. I'm going to step back to the search view here. And I want to note that if you're looking at a numeric field, we have a couple of other options available. So I can graph the values here. So I'm looking at the time facet. This is showing me the value of the time field. And I can see here an average response time over this time period. I have a number of other functions available to me here as well, like I can look at the maximum time, which is obviously much higher than the average. I can also look at my 95th and 99th percentile, for example. So this is going to give me a clearer picture of what the outliers are when I graph this. I'm going to go back to my logs again. And if I go back to my time facet one more time, you'll see that I have another option here for distribution. If I click on distribution, this is going to give me a histogram showing me the relative distribution of the time values. So there was some quick insight into how to get back and forth between search and graphs and some of the different visualizations that you can get on the graphs page. I'm going to return to the search page now and show you around some of the key elements in the UI on this page. So at the top of this pane here, you'll notice that I've got a time range. By default, we're searching the last 4 hours. So right now that's 10:04 a.m. to 2:04 p.m. in my local time zone. One thing to keep in mind is that Scalyr is going to display times based on your local browser time. So someone working on the other side of the country looking at the same account right now is going to see different times relative to their local time zone. It's also showing me the total number of matched events in this 4-hour period and the duration for each of these bars. So these bars show me the relative amount of log lines for each of these time periods. I can actually click and zoom in. So if I click and drag, it'll zoom into a shorter period of time. So now I'm just viewing more like a 15-minute-ish time period. And now at this point, each bar is reflective of 15 seconds worth of activity. You'll notice in addition to these bars, there's also a squiggly line on top that shows me the distribution of events within these time periods. So what I'm seeing is here are these kind of spikes. Things tend to happen kind of right on the line here as opposed to in between the interim between these periods. You'll notice when I do a search, I see the newest events first, so that you can observe this by the arrows here are pointing to the most recent time period. So I can scroll up if I want to go back in time and see earlier log lines, or I can jump around by clicking within this here, or I could use the start and end buttons to move to the beginning or the end, or if for some reason I want to jump to a specific time, I can just type it in here and it'll take me right to that moment in time. The save menu gives me a few options. So once I have a search that I like, if I want to save it and repeat it later, I can save the search. When I save it, this gives me a choice between adding it to my own menu or to the shared search menu. I encourage you to give this a meaningful name. And when I do that, you'll notice then there's a section here of saved searches, which are personal to me, versus shared searches, which are available to everyone on the account. I also have the ability to save a search as an alert. So if I am looking at, for example, the occurrence of a certain error message, a certain status code, etc., I can save that as an alert. We have another tutorial on that. And similarly, I can save, typically you'll save a graph to a dashboard, and we have another tutorial on that as well. You have the ability to download to a text file through the browser. There is a limitation of 10,000 lines, so this is generally for shorter things. And again, this is going to just give you the raw log lines based on your search. For larger data sets, we have the ability to export to Amazon S3. This also has the extra value of it gives it to you in a structured JSON format that also includes the fields that have been parsed out during ingestion. So if you've parsed the logs, perhaps you've enriched them with some additional metadata, you can get that by exporting to S3. The share menu is useful for copying a link. One thing to note here that's kind of interesting is when you copy a link, there are two main benefits. First of all, we provide a URL shortener. So you'll notice that as you're building queries, the URL can get kind of long. We keep adding things to the URL here. And when I go ahead and copy a link, if I open it in a new tab, you can see that I have a URL shortener. The other benefit I get from this is that it has converted the time. So my original search right here was relative. I was looking at the last hour. And when I did a copy link, it converts it to an absolute time. The assumption is that if you're going to share a search with somebody, you want them to see exactly what you're seeing. So it shouldn't be dependent on when they happen to open the URL. That's why we convert it from relative to absolute. So that's the share copy link. We also offer the ability to live tail, which is pretty cool in that it's similar to tailing a log on a server. But here you have the ability to aggregate that, right? So, let's say I'm looking at my access log, but I want to look across all of my web servers. I can do that here by initially setting a filter. And then when I go to Livetail, I'm going to see these log lines stream in. I hear a lot of customers talk about how they will use this feature when they release a new deployment. So they will Livetail the logs to watch and see how a new deployment is performing and try and eyeball any errors they may be seeing. I can go ahead and close this here, and this will take me back to my regular search page. The next thing I'd like to point out are the display options. These are very helpful in terms of choosing how you want to visualize the data within the search screen. So what we're looking at right now is a single line row visualization. So you can see that I've got each log line is one line. I have to scroll to the right to see all of the information. If I would rather not have to scroll, I can wrap the rows. And what that'll do is we'll wrap the rows so that scrolling is not necessary. Along the way here, I have the choice of hiding or showing given system fields, as well as highlighting certain other values that I might care about. So let's look at time and URI path. And so if I select those two things, you'll notice that after my server host and log file name, it shows me the value for the time and the URI path, and then followed by the raw log line. Similarly, I could hide the raw log and I could just see the fields that I care about. I also have the ability to display this as a table. And so if I flip over to the table view here, this is going to give me a more structured display. I'm going to go ahead and revert back to the style that I had before. You'll note as well, you have the ability to save a view as a default, so it'll be there for you when you come back. I'm going to touch briefly on the time selector here. So as you can see, there are a number of shortcuts up top here that give me relative search times. So I could search the last 10 minutes, for example. I could search 24 hours, etc. I also have the ability to actually enter dates and times in here. So if I want to search from one day to the next, This is going to search the 24-hour period from June 20th to June 21st. Or I could put specific times in here. So I could say 1 p.m. to 12 a.m. And so on. I can also do relative amounts here. So if I know that I want to start my search at 6:21 p.m., but I only want to search 1 hour after that, I can put +1h. And so then this will search from this given time to 1 hour later. This is really handy if, for example, I know I want to just kind of eyeball and go from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., etc. I can also put relative times at the beginning here as well. So I can say 7D for 7 days. So this is going to search from 7 days ago to 1 day ago. And so I can see this 6-day period. And again, if I put a plus here, then this is going to be relative. So this will be 7 days ago to 1 day after that. So now I'm searching from a week ago to 1 day later. So there's some nice flexibility here in terms of being able to search different time periods. So next I'd like to talk about actually building a query using the search bar. So I'm going to start over with a new search here. And just the simplest thing you can do is if you type in a single word, we will do a free text search for that one word, and we're going to return all log lines that match. You'll notice that when I'm doing a free text search, it is not case sensitive. If I want to search for multiple words, I need to put them in quotes. So if I'm searching for multiple words, I put them in quotes. Similarly, if I have any kind of punctuation, I will need to put those in quotes as well. We can also do regular expression searches simply by putting a $sign before it. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is look for users where followed by a U and then some number of digits followed by a 1 and a comma. And you'll see here that I'm now matching user equals U followed by some digits ending in 1 and then a comma. And again, this is not case sensitive. I'm going to go ahead and hit the X to clear this out. And now I want to do a search against a specific field. So I'm going to do page equals photo. So this is getting me all of my log lines where page equals photo. It's the same as if I had clicked into here. One thing I want to point out is that searching against a specific field is case sensitive. So as we move into this level of detail, you'll want to be careful to make sure that you are matching on case sensitive parameters. Similarly, I can search for all the pages where something does not equal photo, and that's going to return that result. I can also search for numeric values. So I can search on time is greater than 2,000 milliseconds. So this is going to give me my slower responses. And I also have a couple of keywords available to me. So I can do things like page contains O. And so this is going to give me any pages which contain the letter O. I can also do regular expressions. So I can do I did my user search before where I was looking for users ending in 1. If I do user matches, that's the keyword we use for regular expressions, and I want to match on U followed by some number of digits followed by 1 and the end of the string. And so this is going to give me all of my users end with the digit 1. One thing to note here is that when you are doing a regular expression match here, you have to double escape the backslash. So you'll notice before we used 1 backslash, here we are using 2 backslashes. And generally speaking in Scalyr, you will be using 2 backslashes with the exception of doing that free text search. One more detail I'd like to touch on when building queries using the search bar is around Boolean logic. You may have noticed as we've been clicking around and when we add parameters that we use to narrow down our search results, these just get appended in the query bar. So putting a series of statements together like this is the same as if we were putting ands between them. And so I can either type 2 ampersands or I could literally type the word and I'm going to get the same number of results. I can also type an or, and this will give me the union of the 2 results, and so that's a larger data set. So I can either type or I can type 2 pipes. This also gives me the ability to do nested statements. So I can do things like page equals photo or page equals home in parentheses. And there's an implicit and here, which I don't also need to type. And so what this is going to do is, give me cases where the user matches this and the page is either photo or home. One final thing to note here is if you're looking for any log lines that contain any value for a particular field, you can just do a search for that field equals star. So what I'm looking at now is all log lines where there is any value for the field page. If I want to do the opposite of that, I can just enclose it in parentheses and precede it with an exclamation point. And this is going to give me a search for all log lines where there is no value for the field page. And with that, we reach the conclusion of our introduction to search and graphs within Scalyr. As you'll recall, we started on the log overview page, which gives us visibility into all the different log sources that are sending data to Scalyr. We can click on this page to be taken to search, with our results narrowed down to the log source that we selected. Alternately, you can just go to search and select new search. We also talked about the two filter fields here, the first of which covers the server host or the Kubernetes cluster name, and the second of which covers the log file name or the Kubernetes deployment. Beneath here are our facets. This gives us the ability to narrow down our search, or we can jump over to a graph where we graph attributes according to that facet. We looked at how clicking on a log line allows us to inspect fields and see them in more detail. We also covered a number of other features in the interface, including display controls, setting the time range, as well as building a query by typing into the search bar. If you have any questions, you can always click on the Help button for more information. This gives you a lot of detail about each component of the user interface. As well, in the first section here, we have a link to the query language. And this is a page that's going to give you more information about how to build queries by typing into the search bar. I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@scalyr.com. Thank you very much.